They exchanged vows on a Tuesday, in front of the county clerk and a witness who smelled of pipe smoke and had already lost interest before the final word was spoken. Sarah Pelham, Sarah Pruitt now, though the name sat strangely, kept her hands folded at her waist and her eyes on the clerk's desk rather than on the man beside her. Asa Pruitt signed the register with a hand that did not shake, then set the pen down and picked up his hat from the chair where he'd left it, turning the brim once in his fingers before placing it on his head. "I'll have your trunk loaded before sundown," he said. "That's fine," she said. That was the whole of their wedding day conversation. The ranch sat 8 miles north of Granger's Creek, up a road that turned treacherous in mud season and impassable in heavy snow. Sarah had seen it once before when the arrangement was being discussed, and she had taken careful note of what needed doing. The barn roof drooped on the south corner, the kitchen pump leaked at the base, and the pasture fence along the creek had lost 3 posts to the spring flood. She had made a list in her head and had said nothing about it to Asa, because it was not her place yet, and also because the look in his eyes when he showed her around had been one of controlled shame, the look of a man who knew exactly what another person was seeing and had chosen to see it too. He was 41, she was 38. She had been a widow for 2 years and had spent years managing her late husband's affairs, selling off parcels, paying debts, watching what she'd worked toward dissolve in the hands of men who spoke to her slowly and explained things she already understood. The Pruitt Ranch was failing, but it was failing for reasons that could be fixed with 2 sets of hands and 2 minds that refused to quit. That was what the arrangement was. Both of them understood it. Neither of them pretended otherwise. The first week was polite and careful, the way 2 people move around each other in a kitchen that belongs to both of them and neither of them. Asa rose before light and was outside before Sarah had the stove going. He came in for meals, ate without complaint, and thanked her in a way that was genuine but brief. She asked questions about the cattle rotation and the water rights, and he answered them fully, as though surprised to be asked and more surprised still to find that she followed the answers without needing them simplified. She fixed the pump on the 4th day. She didn't announce it. She simply found the right washer in the toolbox on the porch, replaced it, and primed the handle until the water ran clear. That evening, Asa stood at the sink and worked the pump without thinking, then stopped and looked at it, then looked at her across the room. "The washer was cracked," she said. He nodded slowly. "I kept meaning to get to it." "I know, you have other things." Something shifted in his expression, barely visible, like ice settling on a still creek without breaking. November arrived with grey skies that never quite committed to snow but turned the air to iron. They fell into a rhythm that felt less like awkwardness and more like the early stages of a working order, a thing built from repetition rather than warmth, but honest. She learned that he took his coffee without sugar, and that he had a habit of reading a page or 2 of whatever was near before he slept, whether it was the almanac or a seed catalogue or the back of a flour sack. He learned that she was up before him some mornings, already at the window with her hands wrapped around her cup, watching the dark hills as if she were working something out. He asked her once what she was thinking about. "My first husband used to say worry was just planning without a list," she said. "I'm making a list." Asa set his own cup down and looked out the same window. "And where are we on it?" "Getting better," she said, and meant it about the ranch. She thought later that he might have meant to ask something else, and that her answer might have applied to both things. The cold deepened in December until the water in the barrel by the barn door froze overnight, and the cattle bunched against the fence in the grey mornings, breath rising in columns. Asa reinforced the barn walls with boards he'd salvaged from the broken fence line. Sarah mixed the cattle feed with warm water to keep the animals willing to eat. They worked side by side without discussion, each finding the necessary task and doing it. There were small moments that she catalogued without meaning to, his hand at her elbow when the porch step was icy. The way he moved the lantern closer to her side of the table when she was mending. The evening he came in soaked through and shaking from a broken water trough he'd spent 2 hours repairing in the dark, and she had put a bowl of soup in front of him and stood near enough that the warmth between them was something other than the stove's doing. He hadn't said anything. Neither had she, but he had looked up at her once just briefly, and the look had no armor in it. The blizzard came on the 3rd night of January, without the warning the clouds usually gave. Sarah woke to the sound of the barn door hammering in the wind, and knew before she was fully upright that something was wrong. She dressed in the dark, pulled on her coat and boots, and went into the hall to find Asa already there, lantern in hand, face set with the particular calm of a person who has decided not to waste time on fear. "The south herd," he said. "I didn't get them moved." "Then we move them now." He looked at her for a half-second, and she could see him calculating the argument, the storm, the cold, the danger of sending her out, and she could see him decide correctly that she would go regardless. He handed her the second lantern from the hook by the door. The wind came at them sideways, driving sleet that hit exposed skin like thrown gravel. The pasture was a white blindness past the fence line, and Sarah kept one hand on the post wire and one hand on the lantern and moved forward because there was no alternative. She could hear Asa ahead of her, calling to the cattle in a low, carrying voice, the kind of voice that meant business without panic, and she added her own voice to his, and slowly, too slowly, the cold working its way through her coat at the collar and wrists, the herd began to move. It took an hour she could not have measured. At some point her lantern went out, and she moved by sound and by the warmth of the cattle bodies shifting around her, and then Asa's hand found her arm in the dark and held it, and they walked the last of the herd into the barn together. Inside, with the door bolted and the animals settled, and the single remaining lantern casting its small orange world around them, Sarah became aware that she was shaking, not from cold alone. Asa turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one she had not seen from him before, open, stripped of the careful distance he kept like a garment. He took her cold hands in both of his, slowly, the way a man handles something he is afraid of dropping. "You didn't have to come out," he said. His voice was rough. "They're my cattle too," she said. "This is my ranch too." "Yes," he said, "it is." He did not let go of her hands. She did not pull them away. The storm pressed against the barn walls, and the cattle shifted and breathed, and the lantern burned low, and something that had been held at careful distance all these months crossed the space between them without ceremony, without announcement, the way necessary things do when they have waited long enough. When they walked back to the house through the dying wind, his hand was at her back, steady and sure, and she let herself lean into it just slightly, enough to mean something. Spring would come, the roof would be fixed, the fence rebuilt, the cattle tallied. There were debts yet to settle and 100 mornings of hard work still waiting. But the house was warmer than its walls could account for, and Asa Pruitt, who had forgotten how for anything of himself without expecting to lose it, had learned from a woman who asked nothing of him but honesty that keeping a thing close was not the same as losing it. He brought her coffee the next morning before she was fully awake, set it on the table without a word, and stood at the window in the early grey light in his stocking feet. She watched him from the doorway, this guarded, careful man who had handed her a lantern in a blizzard and held her cold hands in the barn and called her cattle his and hers in the same breath. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. He reached over, without looking, and covered her hand with his. Outside, the snow lay clean and still across the fields they both claimed now, and it was enough, more than enough, to last them all the way home.